This is an absolutely massive sword. But what has this got in common with one of these? Well, surprisingly, more than you might think. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria and Easton Antique Arms. Now, first of all, this sword is known as a montante if you were in the Iberian Peninsula, so Spain and Portugal. If you were in Italy, it would be called a spadone. If you were in Germany, well, some people might say Zweihander, but probably actually more Beidenhander or Schlachtschwert. In fact, they go by lots of different names in German. So there are various names that these go by. And if you were in England, as I am now, then we would simply call this a two-handed sword or a great sword. This is a sword which is too big to be able to really easily be used in one hand. Now, I have demonstrated in the past that you can actually wave these around in one hand, but they are not very dexterous and they are very much intended most of the time to be used in two hands, the only exception really being when you lance them out like a one-handed spear, one-handed momentarily. And indeed they can be half-sworded with as well, but by and large most of the techniques of the two-handed sword are where you have one hand at the top of the grip and one hand at the bottom of the grip. And you might know swords like this from video games like Dark Souls or other things. Quick question incidentally before I go on. The grip on here has faded. I'm going to dye it a new colour. What colour do you think I should dye the leather of this grip? Fantastic sword from Easton Armory, incidentally. I'll put a link down below to their website. Right, so this is a montante. I'm going to call it for the purposes of this video for reasons that will become apparent in a minute. So what on earth has a weapon like this got in common with a weapon like this? Well, they're both weapons and they're both for fighting with and hitting people and defending yourself and taking to war. So on a fundamental level they are both weapons, but it might seem to you that these two weapons don't have very much in common, but actually they have more than you might realise. But before I explain what that is, what is this? So these go by various names. You might have heard the name Morningstar or Morgenstern. In fact, that's actually a different weapon to this. That's actually a spiky head attached to a shaft, which you might be seeing on someone else's channel quite soon. Spoiler alert there. But this is actually more correctly known as a flail, and this particularly is a short version. And actually these are more commonly found in warfare, famously used by the Hussites, for example, in the 14th and 15th centuries. They are more commonly found in longer forms, that is with a shaft about the same length as something like this poleaxe, and then at the top they can actually have a suspended chain with a bull or multiple ones, or what's actually more common, a articulated essentially pendulum head, another piece of shaft which usually has iron, sometimes studs, sometimes spikes added to it. And this of course is, on its fundamental level, the agricultural flail. The flail is an item which is designed for threshing crops, to get the grains out, to make bread, for example, beer, whichever you prefer, I can guess. So they are an agricultural tool, and simply when peasants or militias were formed and they needed cheap weapons, they found, well, those agricultural flails, if we just enhance them slightly with some spikes and some iron, maybe add a spike on the bottom end as well, we've got a really good military weapon. And these flails were actually really useful in very specific applications. Now, as you will see, one of the advantages of a flail, being very careful to use it here, and this is a spoiler for the similarity to the two-handed sword, is that it can go kind of around corners. If you block a flail, then it will flex around and hit you anyway, which is kind of useful. They are, however, harder, generally speaking, to defend with. They're a little bit more unwieldy. You're more likely to injure people standing next to you than you would do with something like a halberd. So they do have disadvantages, but because they articulate and can bend around things, it means not only can you come around someone's block, if they just put their weapon in the way, then the end will articulate and come around and hit them anyway. But also that articulation can come over the edge of war wagons, which is possibly why they were so beloved of the Hussites, or indeed over fortification walls, or perhaps boat sides on board ships. So The fact is that there are advantages to having a weapon like this, whilst there are also disadvantages. And I won't say that flails were ever massively popular in medieval warfare, but we do nevertheless find them in both their long form, used usually by people on foot, and their short form, occasionally used by people on foot, and possibly sometimes also used by people on horseback. But it should be noted, while these are popular in movies, these short ones, the long ones were definitely the more important type militarily in the medieval period. Back to the question, what on earth is the comparison between a flail and a montante, or large two-handed sword? And of course there are lots of differences. This doesn't articulate and bend round things, that does. This is hugely expensive and complex to make. The science of making a blade that long of hardened and tempered springy steel in the 16th century is like insanely impressive. They just couldn't really make many blades that big even as early as the 14th century. We get bearing swords, but they're really quite a special and unusual thing. So on many levels, this is a way more expensive, difficult to make and technologically advanced item. This is, or the flails in general, are an incredibly cheap and basic item. So there are lots of differences between these things, but there is one important similarity. And that similarity is actually noted by an Iberian treatise by a guy called Mendoza. And Mendoza points out that the techniques and usage of the large montante two-handed sword has a lot in common with the flail. What does he mean? Is he correct? Yes, he is correct. I'm going to show you why. So, one of the things with the flail is that you need to keep a continual motion, okay? And in doing so, you can get a lot of reach from the thing, and it means that you have huge amounts of energy to hit anybody who's in range, which means that you're occupying a large area, so long as you keep the thing spinning and moving around. As soon as you stop, the weapon loses momentum, loses energy, and you become very, very vulnerable. But so long as you're moving the thing, you're occupying a huge amount of space and keeping people far away from you. And this is absolutely one of the things that the large montante two-handed sword specialises at. It's used by bodyguards, it's used for protecting things like bridges, crossing points, doorways, and even the tops of galleys, ships. It means that by keeping continual motion and moving the thing around, you can keep lots of people all around you occupied at the same time, which tactically means that one person with one of these might be able to occupy 10 people from the opposing side. Great for protecting your ship against boarders, great for protecting a bridge, or allowing some of your force to escape while that person with the montante holds back the enemy. Or simply for a bodyguard to deal with multiple assailants trying to kill his lord. And the great news for you is, if you can't afford a montante right now, or you're saving up for one, you can just get 2 bits of wood, join them together, stick some spikes on the end, and you can do the exact same techniques. So thanks Mendoza, the montante and the flail. They do have at least one thing, and perhaps we could say a few things there, really in common with each other. So good observation, thank you. I have been Matt Easton, I will of course continue to be, and hopefully I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers folks.
Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks.